Well, I'm really glad that both Stan and I are here, and that I am shocked at how many of our former students have come. I didn't think it would happen. It really is amazing. So there is a lot to look forward to tonight, I hope. And I'm supposed to tell you all the things that I heard from the graduate students this afternoon, but I'm too old for that. But I'll try to start and show you how Stan and I sort of met and how it started. I was hired at the University of Waterloo in 1969 after a postdoc in England, and I was doing work on low temperature magnetic field properties of metals. Stan, were you hired in 69 as well? 70. So we were both there. He was hired into applied math. I was in physics. And I continued some of my work in low temperature studies of materials and so on. And that went fine. I had a PhD graduate student, Chin Seng Kang, who still lives in Malaysia. And he's an important, he's a bigwig in the government there now. So anyway, that's how audio helped him, right? So, but it's interesting because Stan and I were not sure exactly when we first met, but Stan contacted me because he heard something about someone in physics that had an interest in electronics. And we don't know whether it was for something having to do with the Peter Walker's current dumping amplifier, the Quad 405. It was probably that. It might have been something to do with RIAA networks as well. Anyway, what happened was, I think he came to see me, and I do not know when we first met, but it was before 1976, probably 75, 74. I was then in January 1976, I went off to the University of Maryland on a sabbatical, and I was going to study the cyclotron resonance in metals. It's in the far infrared, 300 micron stuff. And I went to the University of Maryland Physics Department, and Stan visited me there. I remember that because we had been already talking about audio together, and I don't remember what the function of his visit to me was, but it was more than likely to talk about the Quad 405 amplifier. Did it have zero distortion? Did it not have zero distortion? Is feed forward, how good is it, etc. That sort of thing. I know that we battled on this question for a long time, and I think Stan's original question to me was, do you think that amplifier really works? Can you get zero distortion that way? And I don't know what I said. I probably said, probably not, or maybe yes, I don't know. But I know that I flip-flopped several times on that issue. And it took us a long time. We looked at all kinds of patents and so on, going back into all the way from Harold Black's feedback. And Harold Black also had patents on feed forward. It's really sort of fascinating how that went. Anyway, that's how we got together. So I know that he visited me in 1976. My wife and I were living in Washington at the time, and there's this lovely picture of Stan and I carrying this box. I don't know what's in the box anymore. Big cardboard box. So I don't know. It must have been, I don't know what it was. It was an enjoyable thing. We went to visit an inventor called Jacob Rabineau, who made a number of inventions in the audio field. One of them, I think, was the parallel tracking Tonearm. And he also had another cute little rig. It's a prism, which if you turn it, the image turns half as fast as the prism because of the way it reflects against the interior boundaries. And if you mount this thing on top of a record player and turn it at half the speed of the record, then you can look in it and the label will be stationary so you can read it, even though the record is going. You see what I mean? That's an important invention. It was then. So he was an interesting man. What I remember about him was that he had this workshop, and it had all these drawers along the wall, and he could pull out almost any mechanism that you wanted and work on it. You know what I mean? He had different mechanisms. It was really quite interesting. Anyway, so I know that we worked on that quad current dumping paper, and that paper came out, when was that, Stan? Do you remember the year? 78?
It was was published in Wireless World.
Wireless World first, that's right.
I don't remember.
And it's interesting. There's a lot of controversy about Peter's amplifier because I think he got a lot of flack over it for various reasons. But it was really a lovely thing. I mean, I think it was a very interesting device, and there's still examples of it about in the industry today. So I believe the first graduate student was Mark Pocock. Mark, put your hand up. That's Mark. And that was 1980, right? And so there would have been a few years that Stan and I had been working together, and I don't know what we did in that interval. I could go back and we could look at some of the papers. Stan was a very early member of the Audio Engineering Society, membership number 18-something. My membership number is 24880, so it was a few years after him. But he went to a number of AES meetings, one of them I think to give the RIA paper, and I don't know what else we did at the time. But clearly, I think we were working together, and you can say the audio research group had started. I don't know whether there were perhaps undergraduate students doing projects. There may have been. I don't know. There usually have been, so that seems likely. But the first graduate student was Mark, and Mark was, at the time, in audio, there were a lot of things that people thought were important, and, so there were listening tests, and of course, a lot of people did non-blind listening tests. A lot of people did, just anecdotal evidence on what's good and what's bad, but Mark did some work on the mid-range, the audibility of mid-range phase distortion. Because if you look at a loudspeaker and you have a crossover, of course, in the between woofer and mid-range, you've got a crossover 400 or 500 hertz, and the phase usually goes through a complete twist of 360 degrees there, or 180 if you care to invert one of the drivers. But these things, the speaker may be fairly flat, but if you look at its impulse response, it's all over the shop. And people were saying, well, you can hear that. Well, we did a lot of tests, and I forget all the things we did, but it really is rather subtle, isn't it, Mark? I mean, you could hear something, and I believe even I was able to hear a few things, and I've got the original cloth ear, so that's. And I remember one thing, that if you record speech, sometimes speech, when you flip its polarity, you can hear that. And I remember that. But generally, the ear is not very sensitive to phase. So you think, until you wear a headphone and reverse the phase of one of the channels, right? Then the ear can hear phase differently than you thought, perhaps. But anyway, so Mark was the first student. And then Peter, where's Peter Shook? Peter, where are you? There he is. You came about 6 months after Mark. And those are the only two dates I'm going to remember, guys, because it really. But Peter was working on optimization of crossover networks. If you had drivers and you had measured them and you had target functions for what you wanted for the crossover, then you could set up a crossover with inductors, resistors, capacitors, and he'd have to do optimizations and do that sort of thing. So that was the second thing that was done. And I believe you were working mostly with Commodore computers, right? Did you do any on the IBM system? No, it was all Commodore. And I have a feeling that we did have, although you used interpreted BASIC, I think we had a compiler as well.
We got a compiler at the end.
Yeah. Okay. Well, anyway, I think I still have that Commodore computer in my basement. Got to get rid of it on eBay. But anyway, and then more students came in the sort of the early '80s, and well, there were many, but I think there were times. Let's see, who was telling me? Yes, I think Paul Baumann was next. Paul, where are you? I think were you after you were after them, right? And Paul says that he got Stan and I all to himself because there was nobody else. other than maybe undergraduate students or something like that. But anyway, Paul had various things to do, and I think that the audio research group, many of you are familiar with the papers we've had. Many of you have heard our students talk about things if you go to AES meetings. So I think that maybe I should just sort of rhyme off the various names that we had this afternoon and see. Now let's see. After you, Paul, who was then? Who was next? I'll just have to call out names then. There's Ewan McPherson. When did you start, Ewan?
87.
87.
Ron was before me.
Ron?
86.
86. And let's see, where Scott Norcross? When did you start?
I was 93.
93. Okay, Jeff?
92.
92. Where are the others? There's Ryan. Ryan, you're
Me and Scott started 2007.
2007. Okay. There must be a couple more. Where's now there's a couple of people that are sort of associated with the lab, and they weren't students. There's Perrin. Perrin, when did you sort of come first to the audio research group?
When Mark was there.
When Mark was there. Okay. And Perrin was interested in recording. He was interested in the campus radio station and things like that. And I guess we had microphones and wanted to talk audio, right?
Yeah, and you had test equipment that I couldn't afford.
Oh, I see. Okay. That's a good reason. Yeah. That's a very good reason. Let's see, who's next?
Rob Stevens.
What?
Rob Stevens.
Rob Stevens, yes. Where's Rob? There he is, yeah.
96.
You all know him. 96? Yeah. And Rob was a part-time student, but I saw quite a bit of him, actually, and doing work on things like impedance tubes, and we did some interesting things there. Anyone left? Have I missed one out? So those are the ones that I, that have come here, right? There have been others that I can remember. There's Rob Wanamaker, who did a lot of work on dither. Now, I guess Dr. Dither sits right there, right? I think Stan is known for dither, and I guess I am too. It's something that I sort of remember how it started, and it may be that in the early days of the audio engineering, audio research group, it may be that we talked about that too. I think we did. Because Stan was worried about the fact that a minus 90 dB sine wave would get clobbered to bits by having just, a few LSBs of variation. And I think I probably said something glib like, well, just add a little noise and it'll average out and, it'll be fine, right? And that, when you start thinking about it, it makes some sense. And I think it went from there to looking at rectangular probability function dither to reduce the distortion, and then triangular PDF dither, which is two randoms added together to make something which wouldn't have any variance variation, so there'd be no modulation noise. And there was one of the early papers had a proof in it that Stan did, which is rather inelegant about how TPDF dither worked. I mean, later proofs by Rob Wanamaker were much better, but you start where you can, right? And it's also interesting because in the audio research group, we really, I mean, let's put it this way, all right? If you take a digital audio system and suppose that I have an ADC which has, say, 16 bits, but those bits are perfect, okay? They sit exactly where they should be. Now, there was a guy from Philips. He would say, well, that's not a 16-bit converter. That's a very much better converter than 16 bits. Because he said, when you say 16-bit converter, it means it's linear sort of to 16 bits. And I can see his point of view. But anyway, the thing is, if you have a digital system and it's properly dithered, then it really has a resolution that does not show its digital character. There is nothing digital about it anymore. It has some noise, and that noise, if the dither is properly done, is also white. It has no correlation from sample to sample. And so really what's happening is if you dither things right, I think I think the audio community had a new thought in the paradigm that it really isn't digital audio at all. It's really analog audio, and we can design the noise to be as low as we like. Thank you very much. And I think that's the beauty of it. And I think, you know, it's still not totally admitted by people, but I think that's been the audio research group's perspective all along. And it's really rather good that it is that way. I think it's a very meaningful thing. It's sort of in honor of Claude Shannon, I think, really. He gave a talk once at an audio engineering convention. He's a short man, and he was talking, and he said, I wanted to bring something along to show you something about the spread of sort of electronics and so on through the country. And he took out of his pocket an old Western Electric 21 valve. And he said that valve went in every repeater together with feedback to bring the telephone system across the States. And remarkable. I remember that distinctly. But it has nothing to do with the audio research group. So it's so what else can I say? Stan and I retired in 2006, I believe, and the lab is still there. I have some of the other students that maybe we should mention. There's Rob Wanamaker, Chris Rurig. Chris Rurig is in BC. Kevin Kotorinsky, I think, is in BC as well. Who else was there? And then I have a graduate student who finished just last year, Janelle Resch. She couldn't make it tonight. She teaches math in one of the colleges, and she had a midterm today and yesterday, but she had to mark it quickly, and so she couldn't come. She was doing the acoustics of the trumpet. And in the cupboard for quite a while, we had a trumpet which had a 1/4-inch microphone at the mouthpiece, a 1/4-inch microphone partway down the first bend, and a 1/2-inch microphone sitting at the bell. And you'd make measurements on those. The trumpet's kind of interesting acoustically because if you think about a pulse of pressure going down the thing, that pressure pulse is so high that the high pressure parts of it travel faster than the low pressure parts of it, because the high pressure parts are adiabatically warmed slightly, so they go a little faster. They catch up with the low pressure parts, and ultimately it'll make a shock wave. It doesn't occur in a trumpet. It doesn't quite long enough to make it. In a trombone, it occurs every time if you blow them at a reasonable level. So that's sort of interesting. But her project was done. She was an applied math student, and she did numerical studies on using a special method to compute nonlinear acoustics, which I'm suspicious of the method because its boundary conditions do not allow the sort of physical things to happen that I think should happen. But anyway, we got some results, and let's not go anywhere else, right? So I think that sort of gives you an idea of the audio research group. I have been doing a few things and Stan with some colleagues in the lab. And I've continued doing some things in England. The year before my retirement, I went off to a sabbatical at Bowers and Wilkins in the south of England. They have a research establishment in a small place 5 miles from the coast, and the factory is in Worthing, about 8 miles away. And all of you know Bowers and Wilkins loudspeakers, I think, or many of you would. And I've gone back there each time and spent some of the Canadian winter there. So I'm not a snowbird, I'm a rainbird. And let's leave it there, Earl. Is that good enough?